Something that strikes me as kind of odd at this point, when I hear someone, complaining about the vaccine or talking about not being vaccinated, and I guess I should clarify now as well. When I'm speaking primarily, of course, of the COVID vaccines, I kind of have a combination of not caring and thinking that, so you are the type of person to play Russian roulette with 5 bullets in a 6-shooter.
Yeah, I've gotten to a place where I don't care either.
Part of me certainly cares because of the whole human aspect of it.
Right.
To give a teaser for how I wanted to bring in the show as well. So part of me cares from that perspective. Part of me cares from the misinformation, disinformation perspective. Part of me cares from the whole make the decision from the actual proper channels, not hearsay or your uncle or whatever. But also part of me is just so tired of hearing those people who are arguing against the vaccine or anti-vaccine even, that I really just would rather you go away. And I'm not meaning, get infected and die either. I'm meaning just stay away from me. Just go. I don't want to hear it anymore.
I don't, there's some folks that some folks I know that are not vaccinated, and it's like, they don't, I've even seen people, I've talked to people who are unvaccinated, like, they don't care either, like, in the sense of, like, nobody, it just matters less now. And it does matter less now because, certainly we've entered the phase where of the pandemic where it's no longer a pandemic and it's become very much endemic. And the number of cases that exist doesn't matter anymore, because the hospitalizations have gone so low. Like, even if cases go up, hospitalizations are still going down. And it's getting to a place where it's like, I know 2 years ago, I don't want to say I called it. I just, here's what I learned in evolutionary biology, and that is that when a virus, if a virus is so virulent that it causes a worldwide pandemic, in a few years' time, it'll become so much less virulent and so much more contagious that we consider it a part of regular everyday life. So at this point, like, you get it, when people get COVID, like, I know I have a friend who got COVID, and he felt so dirty about it. And so he was, like, very upset about it because he had been so cautious for the last 2 years that he just felt like, like he failed. And I'm like, this is not a failure. We're all going to get it at some point. And at this point, it matters way less, especially if you've been vaccinated. But even if you haven't been vaccinated, it matters way less because like, the strains that are out there are so much less virulent. We're at a point where, like, I don't know what strain we're on.
And just to add to that too, it's not just that it's become less virulent. It's also, we do have post-infection treatments now.
Yes.
That was not something that existed prior. And so even if you are unvaccinated and do test positive, there are medications specifically crafted to help combat that infection becoming severe.
But let's talk about, I feel like it's a good idea that since we're talking about the vaccine, and the last show we talked about the pro-life position. There's a we talked about putting the two together.
Yeah, there's an interesting paradox or
there's an intersection here. There's an intersection here.
Yeah, I want to be so flippant, so I'm pausing for a moment just so I can say it with a straight face. The people who railed against masks and vaccines from the standpoint of it's my body, don't tell me what to do, every single one of you should be out there arguing against the potential removal of Roe versus Wade as a protection for women for the same fucking reason.
It's my body. I can do what I want with it.
It boggles me that people want to still make this argument when we're talking about the slightest inconvenience when you talk about a mask in certain spaces, or the push for vaccination when it's been proven to be effective. These people still want to argue that inconveniencing a woman is not on the same level. I don't get that.
Well, I don't get how it would be on the same level because, wearing a mask.
Oh, it's far worse. That's true.
Right.
I get where you're going. I don't want to. I want to pause that though, because that's like at a very, very, very fundamentally high level. The argument is, don't tell me what to do with my body, and that's the piece that's the same. The injustice by going through and enforcing it is significantly worse for women.
Right. The overlap of don't tell me what to do with my body. I'm not going to take you can't force me to take this vaccine or wear a mask. The overlap of the folks that held that sentiment and with the sentiment of you got pregnant, you have to carry that baby to term and commit the next 18 years of your life to rearing that child. It's astonishing.
I would love for someone to do a study that correlates those views.
Yeah.
I would love to see what percentage of correlation exists between those views. How many people are pro-life, quote unquote, and anti-vaccine or anti-mask? Or make all three different categories. Give pro-life, pro-choice, anti-mask, anti-vaccine. I would love to see the correlation of those things.
I love a good Venn diagram, and I feel like this lends itself to a good Venn diagram as well.
I might take a stab at drawing one.
Yeah. It'll be on I guess it'll be based on a wet finger in the air, but still.
Yeah. So yes, the reason I wanted to bring this topic in is because to me it is so absolutely absurd to think that we don't have the same level of outrage on something as restrictive as what amounts to a ban on abortion. Maybe that's a bit heavy-handed. It's allowing states to dictate what restrictions are around abortions. It's not necessarily going to be a ban. There are some states that are certainly going to continue to protect a woman's right to choose. How many of those? That's really the question. So an outright ban is not quite adequate phrasing. I don't want to be overly hyperbolic.
Right. It's not a ban. It's not a ban at all. It's overturning the protection,
right,
federal protection that Roe versus Wade has afforded this country for nearly 50 years.
But the part that I'm just having so much trouble with, and I think it's evident in the way that I want to be so flippant with the argument, but I really do want to dive into it a little bit, is how someone cannot see the hypocrisy between telling a woman what she can and can't do and railing against being told what you can and can't do. It's the same thing. It's just two different categories. And if you're opposed to being told what to do, you should be opposed to being told what to do through and through, and opposing that for other people. Otherwise, you're just being petulant.
Well, we can also take it a higher, a level higher, because within this narrative, there are large groups of folks that are motivated by religious beliefs, and if your religion is the majority religion in this country, then I guess you don't see a problem. You don't see a problem with that. But what happens if
I disagree? The majority may not, but those who understand.
Yes, I'm not phrasing. I I see how I muddled my words there, and I want to say, if there within this narrative, there's the religious motivation aspect, where the religious belief that a medical abortion is wrong and should be legislated around the country plays into a form of voting against or legislating against your own interests. Because right now, while the majority of the people in the country share the same religion as you, if that were to change and you've set a precedent for making decisions based on religious beliefs, and your religious belief is no longer the dominant religious belief in the country, you've set a precedent for something that we may have lost your protection. I said that so terrible.
That's all right. There are two.
Can you clean this up for me?
Yeah, there are two key things to hone in on there. So one,
thank you.
If you're attempting to do anything in government that is rooted in religious ideology or philosophy or thought or principles, number one, you're doing it wrong. Predominantly because the purpose of government in the United States is to do things that objectively creates a better life for the citizenry of said government. That's what the formulation and foundation of the guiding bodies, principles, documents, etc. attempted to do, even where it fell short. The other piece of it, though, is very important to key in on. It was expressly stated that the United States does not have an official religion and is willing to accept and offer freedom from persecution for all religions. That is one of the cornerstone principles for the formation of the country, which means see point A. Right, so you can't govern from a religious perspective and do it either effectively or efficiently or objectively or equally for all of the citizenry you represent, because there is not an official religion, there is not restriction on religion other than the same restrictions that apply to all rights, where once your practices or actions or other exercising of rights infringes upon those of another, there's a problem.
Right.
Well, guess what? Regulating abortion infringes on the rights of others.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this, because this is tangentially related, but it's like Mormons. They believe in their polygamy is part of their religion. Should they be allowed to marry multiple wives or husbands?
I would say that's an issue for those people who regulate marriage.
Right?
And who is that?
The church?
No.
The state?
So if you are, it's kind of a trick question and not a trick question. There are two different areas here, right? You can either have a marriage recognized by your religious affiliation, or a marriage recognized by a legal authority for the status it conveys within society or the benefits, etc., or both. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but who regulates it under which scenario is different and is driven from different reasons.
It's the state. So we can ignore what your religious institution recognizes and so forth, because it doesn't really have any bearing on.
It doesn't have any bearing on actual civil or criminal law in society.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any bearing on how your insurance pays out, various things like that. Like who is next of kin, like you don't have, you're in the hospital, are you next of kin, and so forth. So I'll restrict this to the state, and I think that to be, what's the word I'm looking for? To be consistent. It's like if I don't want your religion telling me that, what to do with my body, then I guess that would go and be the same, for how many people you want to marry.
Yeah. This is a fascinating argument, right? Because if you really get down to a true separation of church and state,
right,
then any and all arguments surrounding restriction of abortion cannot be brought to bear from a state perspective. Like, what's the motivation behind restricting abortion? It's not a state issue. Like, that's not who's bringing the issue forward to the states for the purpose of restriction, or that's not where the motivation is coming from. It's the motivation is the pro-life argument that we hear from the religious side of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're bringing an argument forward as a religious argument, however you craft it, if the driving force behind it is that this religion sees this as an abomination and it must be restricted, that should immediately be nullified from a state level, because it's catering to and placing restrictions around activities based on religion, even if it's not specifically supporting said religion. It's just supporting this viewpoint from that religious approach.
Well, my religion says that stealing is wrong.
Technically, the criminal law of the land also says that stealing is wrong.
Well, I was, my argument for that was like, well, we didn't need your religion to know that stealing was wrong, but I'm glad your religion got that correct. Excellent.
Well, the counter argument there, though, is that we also say that the killing of another person is wrong. So where do you define a person?
Well, let's be careful there, because is it killing or is it murder? Because sometimes a killing happens.
There are justified killings, but then that actually opens up a whole separate digression that I don't know that you anticipated. If we want to be that technical, then murder is a thing, whether intentional or unintentional. Manslaughter now comes onto the table.
Yes.
What is it? Wrongful death.
Yeah, there's a reason why somebody has, groups of people have sat and thought about these things and described these things and classified these things, because they're different. At the end result, life has been lost, but there are different reasons and different things that happen. And right now, we're throwing a blanket down and saying, you know what, human life is sacred, and it must persist, and you can't terminate it out of convenience.
But there is one difference when you think about the various degrees, like murder in the first, second, third, whatever, manslaughter, et cetera, et cetera. The criminal system is looking to assign a certain level of accountability based on intent. Do we try to translate the same thing to abortion, or do we just say abortion bad, you shouldn't do it?
The latter sounds more like what's been happening.
Like, I didn't ask what's happening, because we know full well what's happening. I asked what should we potentially look at instead. Because my thought is the choice to pursue an abortion is your choice, not mine. I may disagree with your choice. I may disagree with your rationale. That doesn't change anything for me. I don't have to live with the consequences of my actions, or I have to live with the consequences of my actions, not yours. It's entirely something that, to me, should not be restricted, other than if you want to put in something that says like you have to at least have a conversation where you can attempt to persuade them to go the adoption route, assuming everybody is healthy, but not actually a restriction on what they can do. Just, I could understand at least saying, hey, we want to promote adoption. If you still choose to terminate, that's your choice. That's about the only restriction I can conceivably say I might even think is worth putting in. And I think that's too much.
Can we do it for guns? Gun sales?
Well, you could, but then you're going to have most of the Southeast decide to try to secede again.
Didn't work the first time. And that was a bit of a hardier group of folks.
I'm not so sure it would fail the second time. I think there might be a willingness to say, you know what, we don't want you.
Oh man. No, what I mean though is like, if there's this to me is like a really the whole pro-life position is a really fundamental part of my upbringing, or a fundamental part of my disengagement from religion. I turned 19 right before the a couple months before the 2000 election. This was Bush. George W. Bush was running against Al Gore. At the time, Vice President Al Gore. And I remember abortion being an issue. Like I remember, I was at the time I was in. I remember there was a group that within the sort of underground Christian heavy rock music that I was listening to. There was a group called Rock for Life, and they were a foundation that supported was like a pro-life foundation. And I remember I had this T-shirt that said "Abortion sucks," and I remember everybody like in that crowd was like, "That's so cool." And then I heard somebody say, "Hey, it's not very sensitive to the women that might be going through an issue like this." And this is all happening around the time that I turned 19, and I can remember watching the presidential debates in the autumn of 2000, and I just remember having the thought, like, how is it I grow up and I'm okay hearing the concept that capital punishment is good and we can take another person's life and that's okay, but the sanctity of life is above all else, and we cannot take life away, especially the life of the unborn, the lives of the unborn. And I'm just like, I just struggled with that for 2 minutes, and I'm like, this is so, like, the inconsistency here is so obvious. And so I just said, well, I have to pick. And so I chose the sanctity of life, and I said abortion is wrong, and so is capital punishment. And that thread in the sweater got yanked. And over the next few years, I kept pulling and pulling until there was no more sweater, and I had a pile of thread, threw it away. But I just remember, that, and I just don't see that sort of like thinking inconsistency anymore.
I think it's fascinating that we have such different views on why, or maybe not. Maybe it's more just how we arrive at the why. But for me, it's very much I don't want to hear your very specific "don't do this" message yet again. I want to know, if you take this book that is supposed to be a guiding thought or principle or way of living, and understand what it means, I want to compare that to this other book that is supposed to be the same thing, and this other book that is supposed to be the same thing. And I want to understand what makes them different and what makes them similar. And lo and behold, the differences are just in the details, for the most part. I mean, I'll spare a couple of the larger theological differences, because they don't matter if you actually think about how they're the same. Everything. Again, resorting to absolutes, and I don't want to be overly hyperbolic. And I've said this many a time, all major religions, so every single one of the ones that you would think are a generally accepted and well-practiced religious path or faith structure or belief structure, every last one of them promotes empathy and support and loving of others. All of them. None of them promote a human having the ability to judge or condemn another human. If that's overall the set of guiding principles that faith in a higher power is attempting to drive forward for humanity as a whole, I'm 100% on board with that, because it aligns with what I feel humanity should be striving for in and of itself when thinking about fellow humans. There's a fundamental need in order for humanity to survive, that it must accept itself for what it is, and that is a flawed group of people attempting to create a better tomorrow with each other. And how do you do that? You do that through being empathetic and through being supportive and through helping those around you, not condemning those around you, not judging those around you, and then trying to move forward.
Yeah, when I first heard, when somebody first pointed out that my abortion sucks shirt was insensitive, and they weren't trying to be like politically correct. They were really trying to make the point, like, you don't know what that woman's life has been like. You don't know how difficult that decision might have been for her. You don't know how fortunate that woman might be to be like, oh, I do have a choice. I do have this kind of control. You just don't know. And to shame somebody in that position is never going to be the right way. There's nothing Christian about it. It's just hateful. It's hateful and evil.
I would walk that back slightly, because I wouldn't say that it's inherently hateful or evil as much as it is uneducated, and then it becomes hateful or evil when it is an educated position continuing to exert that type of influence. And the reason I make that distinction is because all of us fall short. I mean, as good as any of us want to be, at some point we're going to screw it up in maybe a minor way for that particular interaction, maybe a hugely major, absolutely horrific, asshole way in another situation. The difference is when you are attempting to be better, when you are attempting to be that good person and move humanity forward for the sake of both yourself and your fellow humans, the whole point is that you are able to reevaluate day to day, based on new information, what the approach should be. And if you recognize, or if it is pointed out that, hey, this is maybe not what you think, and if you're able to reevaluate it and come to a different conclusion, or maybe you come to the same conclusion because you don't feel that other opinion is valid, the motivations there speak to whether it is evil or hateful as opposed to just uneducated. Or naive even, instead of uneducated.
Right, I kind of want to argue that. And I was like, I think you can have a hateful position and it be that of ignorance, and we have a level of like, oh, you were uneducated, you took this hateful position, but you were uneducated. And it's when you become educated to that, or you become informed. Like, I don't even say educated. If you're in a position of not being appropriately informed, and there's this hatefulness through ignorance, and then when you become informed, and then you know, at that point you don't change your position, then yeah, that's just, you know, you're a hateful person. But I think that you can. I understand why you wanted to walk it back a little bit, but I don't necessarily agree that.
So I would certainly agree that there is a middle ground also in between the positions that we're expressing, because it's not a black and white spectrum. There's a continuum.
Sure.
And this is something that we have a bad habit of trying to avoid in most general discussions, because continuums are messy. They don't allow for clean cuts between what is hateful and what is not, or what is actually a just result of naivete versus what is a result of selecting to be naive.
Right. And that's
but
why
all of those things do exist.
Yeah, and that's why we have all these words to use and talk about, and you know, so cool.
Yeah,
I feel better about that then.
And I definitely, and I do think it's valid to point out, because I often forget to overly clarify that I don't look at anything as X and Y delineation points. I approach all of behavior on a continuum. I don't emphasize it often, though, so I think it's very valid to force that into the conversation.
Yeah.
Because it is something that everyone should be aware of. Just because you are less informed on a particular way of phrasing something or saying something does not lessen its impact on those around you.
Right.
And recognizing that in addition to wanting to be better and a willingness to listen and be informed by those around you, all of those things do come into play.
Right. The level of information that you have about the topic at which you are, espousing often does not come into play. It's like, I hold this position about this, and how well informed or how misinformed I am usually doesn't matter. The position you hold affects the people that are around you.
And it's also a fairly interesting thing. I don't want to take us down a side trail, but one thing I'll mention is something that we might come back to in a future episode. The difference between a action or behavior affecting others around you fairly unilaterally versus the desire to talk about one person feeling this way and others not, and treating that as a overreaction, I guess is a good way to put it. It's not the word that came to mind, but we see it everywhere about how older generations were less likely to get their feelings hurt about a statement or something of that nature, and it's horrifically misguided. And the main reason I want to even bring it up is because this is yet another continuum on the receiving side or the observational side of this that is also at play, that is worth potentially diving into as well. And so that's a recognize that this is also part of it, and we may go further into that in the future. But to kind of bring it back to how we started this particular episode, I have a question, and it's going to be fun to put you on the spot because I didn't think about the question until now.
Cool. I'm ready.
Thinking about what we've talked about with regard to the apparent overturning of Roe versus Wade, and the thought of that being a state's decision, with the recognition that in this episode we've talked about the argument for restricting abortion is driven from a religious aspect, so that's being pushed toward the state from other entities. So if you think about the Supreme Court attempting to push this to the state from above, and the religious aspect trying to push this decision to the state from, I'm going to call it below, even though it's just separate, but two different directions. It creates a fairly significant amount of pressure on the state to act. What do you think that means for not only this particular issue, but just shaping the way states react to forming policy going forward? Do you think it's abnormal compared to pressures previously, and maybe this is just a specific topic that is going to see really split opinions on as a result? Or do you think this is going to change the landscape for how states approach policy and legislation moving forward? Or do you think it's just kind of we're making more of it than the states will? The states are just going to do whatever they randomly decide to do that they would have anyway. Plenty of different options to unpack there. I wanted to give some examples to at least give an idea of what I was looking for, since it's such a kind of off-the-wall question, but it ties into both this show and the previous show pretty well.
The fact that this, a thing can be legal in this state and illegal in another state, I don't want to say it baffles me, but I think it's the dumbest thing. It's.
I was hoping you were going to go this way, because there's been a previous argument that's been mentioned a couple of times on the show that I kind of expected might be the response, and it sounds like we might be headed there.
Yeah, the fact that you could be in one state and to say it again, it's like, this is illegal here. We cross this line over here, and it's legal there, and we're in the same country. It just doesn't make sense to me. The fact that the education system in one part of the country is so much different and maybe not as good, like the quality of education and what is brought is so different depending on where you are in the country geographically, does not make sense to me. Like the why this has gone the way that it has for so long just seems so silly. Like
I know that the way it's been phrased before is this whole arbitrary delineation of rights based on geography is strange.
Based on made up lines and that sometimes follow the path of a river makes no fucking sense.
Yeah, or it's antiquated, I think, is how it's been presented in the past. Here's kind of a follow-up to that question. I think that the concept of a state more or less models that of what used to be governorships for territories with the large geographic expansion of different kingdoms or regimes, right? I think it makes sense that it's difficult to govern something the size of, let's just say, the United States without having some sort of smaller sections that allow for more refined levels of governance. So I don't want to say that it's a dumb idea to have some concept of geographic regions comprising another geographic region. I think there are arguments to be made for different values. I think where it falls down, or where it has become antiquated, is in this concept of each of those regions being relatively sovereign without having sovereignty.
Yes. The way I was going to phrase it is, it's like, well, I don't care about the representative from the 5th District of California. Like, they're, who they're representing, like, who represents that district doesn't really matter to me because I'm not there. And so on that level, yeah, creating divisions and subdivisions of the land base, to represent the people accurately is important. So I guess where the problem I have is, it's like, why is the state government not working in conjunction with the federal government? Why isn't the state level just a state level form of the federal government?
Or maybe the better way to phrase that question, why is the state level government often at odds with the federal government?
Yes.
And the main reason I wanted to phrase it that way is because you have multiple states who have elected to bring about laws that are extremely restrictive of abortion in defiance of what to this point has been protected under Roe versus Wade, strictly to bring this argument to bear in the form that we're seeing it play out.
Yep.
And why? Or why is not even the appropriate way to think about it. If it's not something that is ubiquitously despised, is not the right word, ubiquitously wanting to be changed. If it's something that is desired by the majority of people across the country to change, the method for changing that is Congress. That's where theoretically the people who represent you at the most direct geographic level should be bringing your arguments to bear in a forum that would shape things across the entire country. So why instead do we have a mechanism for individual states to create restrictions or laws that specifically seek to challenge these things when it's brought forth by a single state and not a overall representation of the people? This is, I think, where it fundamentally creates a problem for me in how the states have a certain amount of power that doesn't reflect the overall majority of the country.
Right.
And I know I did not describe that in the best possible way. It's just it's so tough to abstract that into something that is easier to pull apart. Because realistically, under this model, you could pick the least populated state with the lowest number of representation and create a law that challenged everything that was accepted across the entire country and see it play out in the same way you're seeing it play out with the restrictions on abortions from multiple other states. And it just seems wrong. And of course, I don't have a good example because we have not had that happen, but it's plausible, and that's the problem.
Yeah. I think it's so easy to see these problems here, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we don't have any anti-corruption laws. We don't have any anti-corruption measures in place for all of the corruption.
I feel like that's a way to kind of toss a cheap shot out. I don't disagree, but I feel like that's trying to bundle it into a nice statement that doesn't necessarily exist. Because I don't even think it's all legitimately corruption. I think some of it is just misguided ideology that's driving some idea forward as well. You can make the argument that that's corruption of a social nature or a cultural nature, but laws aren't going to correct that. I mean, that's something that you have to be able to have a different set of checks and balances in place for. And I think it's more fundamental that within the legal system, there's not a clear set of checks and balances when the legal system has decided to be a driving force in and of itself. Like the idea of
Right.
checks and balances on the Supreme Court reside around the ability for the other branches to change aspects of the court. So you've got the appointment process or nomination and appointment process and everything else. But you also have the ability for, is it the executive branch that can change the number of justices with like confirmation by Congress? Is that how it works?
I think so, but I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know for sure. But either way, this is the other set of checks and balances, is that the court's shape and size can be modified by the other branches. And that's theoretically the way to maintain a set of checks and balances on the Supreme Court. The problem is that it assumes a fully functioning set of branches within government that's willing to govern.
So the thing that I thought of when you said this was, it's like, I thought about AI. When AI becomes self-aware, does it stop itself from doing what AI does? No, it just keeps going. So
that's how you get to Skynet eventually.
Right, exactly. So, when Skynet became self-aware, it'd be like, oh, wait, I might, ruin some folks' lives. No, that's not the direction it went. And I know it's a silly use of, some science fiction, but yeah, the thing, the monster doesn't willingly put itself back in the cage.
Well, in full fairness, I absolutely actually do love the analogy because I think it's perfect. But I think there's something else even more fundamental we can point to, and that is once there is a recognition of power, there is a continued pursuit of power.
Yes.
Whether you're talking about the domain of science fiction or not so distant science fiction, actually, at this point, whole different topic. Whether we're talking about something like AI and trying to draw parallels to popular culture, or if we're talking about proven ideological fallacies or the current trajectories, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what setting you want to pull from. All of it stems from there is a point where power is realized, the exercising of said power is attempted.
Feels good.
And it is, yes, it drives a positive response to those exercising the power, and there's a continued pursuit of that power.
And there's an unwillingness to relinquish that power.
Yes. That scenario, that recognition of having, exercising, and retaining power, that's what a system of checks and balances is supposed to offset or prevent. The problem is that when the identification and exercising of power is present in multiple points along a set of checks and balances, those sets of checks and balances no longer become effective. And that's where we currently are. And I have no clue what that means for future policy or direction, or how to walk back from the precipice that it seems like we're on.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.